Welcome to the U3 Media Podcast, where our mission is to unite the world through coffee, connecting you to the farmers and coffee entrepreneurs through the stories they share. I'm Christy Ross, and joining us today is Alan Leibowitz, founder and CEO of Pit Crew Coffee Service. Welcome, Alan. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning, Christy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so I got to set the stage for you because there's a lot of stuff in your background, and this is also for the benefit of the audience. So Alan is the past chair of the Roasters Guild Executive Committee. He's a credentialed instructor for the SCA and former SCAA, and has taught many aspects of coffee in numerous countries, including roasting, cupping, brewing, green coffee, and safety. He's owned and run coffee companies for almost 20 years out of Michigan and Texas. And he's now running his own equipment tech service company out of Houston and New Orleans. All right. So, Alan, you've had an incredibly interesting path in coffee from founding the roasting business to building cafes and now to your equipment tech service. So, what was the spark that got you into coffee in the first place?
I think this is kind of funny, but I was a high-tech person. I was doing internet when it was first starting. And I was at one of our labs in Palo Alto, and one of the lead network engineers said, "Hey, would you like an espresso?" And he had a small little home machine, and one of his compatriots used to get espresso beans from Pete's in Oakland at the original Pete's. And it was like, sure, I want an espresso, whatever that is. And then one thing led to another, and started, home roasting. And then the joke when I had my computer business was, hey, you should be doing coffee. And then I did.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love it. Well, so I in talking to a few people in the industry that know you, they've said so many wonderful things about you. One of the things though about in roasting, so it takes a lot of patience to develop any particular coffee, right? Which is sort of like a bit of exploration. So now you're servicing other people's equipment that maybe they don't treat so well, and maybe they don't know as much about. They just want it fixed like as soon as possible. But how do you manage that external patience needed versus the internal patience of producing, your own product, let's say?
Yeah, I think the commonality is that they're both learning experiences. So when you're roasting, you're developing, some sort of learning about the coffee, and you do that through the process and the techniques that you know. Then on the flip side, you're kind of educating customers because, if you think about it, customer buys a piece of equipment. They don't know anything about it. It's not unreasonable to say, hey, let's just use it until it doesn't, work anymore. So to me, it's that part of the education. It's just one's, as you mentioned, is really one's kind of an internal learning or education, and one of them's, external. But it's really the same, process. It's kind of understanding all the levels of learning, what you don't know, then understanding what you don't know, and then becoming competent at everything that you do or trying to.
Sure. Well, so do you consider yourself a patient person?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've had this discussion a lot with people in the coffee industry about patience and people's attention issues. And broadly, I've always been very focused and passionate about what I'm interested in. And coffee is a deep-rooted interest for me. So I am fairly patient. And I think that's one of the things that being an educator helps with, is really developing your patience. And it really kind of tries what you know, right? You can know something, and then it's a different skill to be able to relate that and teach somebody that knowledge.
So true. So true. And you got to be an incredible listener and understanding what people are picking up. You have to have sort of a good sense of being able to read body language sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So you left a business that you founded, and you moved from Michigan to Texas to start another coffee business called Momentum Coffee.
That's right.
How does this type of question always fascinates me, or the answers, I should say, always fascinate me. How does the coffee market differ between Texas and Michigan?
I think both of the locations were a little bit behind the nation. I think the two coasts, Seattle, California, New York, were kind of ahead of the curve. Ann Arbor, in particular, Southeast Michigan, was a little behind. That said, strangely, Houston was also a little behind, even maybe more so than Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor had the benefit of being a college town, so there's a pretty sophisticated base of, people, professors, students, changing from all over. But Houston was just a tiny bit behind, and it's just catching up. So it's kind of interesting. And it really, Houston felt like a boom town in the coffee business, at least specialty coffee. Ironically, coffee's been huge in Houston. It's a major part of the economy. There's one of the world's largest decaf and roasting plants was actually here. But the specialty was kind of like a green field here.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about the decaf. Interesting.
Yeah, there was a CO2 decaf plant. There's only one of two in the world, one in Germany and one was here in Houston, which closed about 5 years ago.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
So what? So when you've actually since closed Momentum Coffee, is that right as well?
We did. We closed it really towards the onset of COVID. We just really weren't quite geared up to the change in the business model. But by then, the sales and service side had really, which was a separate company called Pit Crew Coffee, and that was really kind of the profitable business in the coffee side.
Okay. So that already existed when you had your coffee business. This was sort of a side business that complemented your cafe and roastery. Okay.
Yeah, it was really kind of a second business. Some of the manufacturers, through some of the relationships I had made at the SCAA, had said, hey, we're looking for some people to essentially work and sell our equipment in Houston. So I'd started doing that, and it was pretty clear without painful details. The cafe is a high investment, low margin business, and sales and service is really a low overhead, much higher margin business. So the math is pretty easy on that side.
Yeah. And it's so one of the things I used to do, Alan, is interview CEOs and founders of startup companies, large companies, sort of ran the gamut. But one industry that tended to give the same answers all the time. This was like the restaurant industry, which cafes would fall under that too. It's like, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to start, restaurant business? They're like, don't do it because the margins are small, right? I mean, it's a lot of effort, a lot of capital, and it's a lot of your time. Right. As an owner operator, that is sort of your business. It's like feels 24/7.
Yeah. And, that was one of the things at my former business as part of the Zingerman's group. They always had three bottom lines, which is something I've valued and have carried forward. But their thing was great food, great service, great profit. And it's really true. And, you really can't ignore the third one, which is profit. You can have a great little cafe in the heart of New York City and, be sleeping in, your friend's couch. And that doesn't really make sense. It's not sustainable, so to speak. At least not, yeah.
I'm really curious how Zingerman's did it then, because they have a great product though. So
right. Yeah. It's a great product. It's unparalleled service, which is something I've try to continue in my company. Really the great profit part comes into pricing. They're not the cheapest in the market for a given product. I'm also not, in our service company, we don't want to be the cheapest. We're not into a race for the bottom. We want to provide unparalleled, unconditional service to our customers.
Right. Yeah. Quality and customer service, I think, is just, that's got to sit at the top, right? Yeah. It's absolutely one of the most important pillars, I think, of a business. Because you're there for the customer in the end, right? That's right. Part of why you're in business. So what would you say is a lesson that you can pass on to someone else who's trying to, I'll say decide between the tipping point between success versus, and growing their business versus folding it or selling it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to really have a really firm grasp from the beginning on what the financial picture looks at. I think a lot of people think I can run for a year, I can get up and run and not really worried about finance because I have a certain amount of capital. But I think really you want to be on it from day one. Don't put that off.
Yeah. One of the top 3 reasons that startups fail is because they run out of money, right? The top 3 are that there's no customer need for what they're trying to build, or it's they run out of money, or they don't have the right team around them. But I totally agree. If you don't have a grasp on the finances, it is probably potentially high probability it will fail.
Yeah.
So, okay. So why don't you share with our audience exactly what Pit Crew does and the services it offers? And I'll even say sort of the who, as well. Who are you servicing?
Yeah. I guess concisely, we sell and service coffee equipment. We specialize in espresso machines, and we tend to work with really the higher end, the higher tier of espresso machines. So our customers are everybody from mom and pop places that are using an entry-level machine to mom and pop places that are using $30,000 custom machines that we order or build for them. And then we also do work directly for manufacturers. We represent and are trained and service some of the well-known manufacturers. And we recently started doing work for 2 or 3 national chains where we're the preferred service provider. And they've got equipment in place at, large national chains. So we're kind of running the gamut. Our business has been skewing a little bit towards the larger players. They also tend to have the most complex equipment. And one of our niches is that we've specialized in the complexity. And we're fortunate to have technicians that are also very highly skilled.
Yeah. How many people do you have on staff?
We have 5 people on staff now, and we're a small company. We service really the Houston and New Orleans markets and kind of everything in between. You probably know this, but Houston is an enormous city. The joke is you can drive, for an hour and you can say, where am I going? And it's like Houston to Houston, and it's 50 miles.
I have not been to Houston, so I'll have to make that trip out there.
Yeah.
So do you have plans actually to go beyond New Orleans and Houston?
Yeah, we're pretty quickly going to be expanding up into Alabama, into Mobile. We're looking at going a little further south and west in Texas. But again, Texas is so big that our plan is slow, but hitting a couple of underserved markets.
Got it. Okay, so what is I'll say a common theme or something you run into a lot when you are fixing equipment? Like, what are are there things that come up time and time again?
Absolutely. The 2 biggest things are people ignoring preventive maintenance. And it's called that for a reason. For whatever reason, even at large chains, small chains or mom and pops, people tend to just run the machine till it dies. And man, you don't do that with anything else you own. You can have a $30,000 machine that can be as much as a car. And, you don't just run it till it dies because you didn't change the oil ever. So the biggest thing is ignoring it as if it was an afterthought. And then probably the second biggest thing is water quality. I mean, you need good water to make good coffee or tea, right? It's 98.5% of a beverage. Then the flip side of water is, will it destruct your machine? And really those 2 things, which are kind of related because treating your water is a preventive thing, I would bet those account for 70% of our calls.
Oh, wow. That actually makes sense, though. And it does. It's 2, I'll call simple things. They just, take time and attention.
Yeah.
Is there any on the maintenance side of things? Would you say is there a suggested schedule of maintenance or cleaning that you come back to those 70 percent of people with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, really, any shop should routinely be doing preventive maintenance every 6 months. There are wear parts or gaskets that are going to prevent leaks. And here's the craziest part about preventive maintenance. A lot of times you're changing small little seals, tiny little O-rings that are like as big as the eraser on a pencil. And a steam leak with a little tiny $1 O-ring that's that big can really totally destroy a $12,000 machine. You can go from a $1 O-ring to a $1,000 repair pretty quickly. So don't ignore the hissing sounds or the little leaks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you get on a schedule like where you come in and you help them clean, or you just inspect like you do preventative every 6 months? Or I know you're saying internally, like the teams should be doing this, but do you do that for your customers then, where it's just you're coming in? Here comes Alan. It's, end of the quarter.
Yep, we do exactly that. And those are some of the customers that end up having the lowest cost of ownership. And if they decide they want to upgrade or sell their machines are in the best place. It's a good financial win for them. So our best customers are doing quarterly maintenance. Some of our large corporate accounts are doing every 6 months. And we build in water filtration, which is, as I mentioned, really is kind of key. But yeah, it's a small price to pay. It's pretty interesting. And I think all this, to me, gets back to what we talked about, which is understanding finance. Someone might say, hey, I don't want to spend $300 for a quarterly PM. And it's like, what do you want to do with your $15,000 machine a year from now? Do you want to buy another one?
Yeah. Yeah. And you hear that kind of question and immediately they get it. And they,
Right. Yeah, most do.
most, right. Right.
Mhm.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about Pit Crew and getting it off the ground. So it sort of existed at the same time that you were running Momentum. But when you made that decision to sort of flip the switch, if you will, were you were in a situation where was it were you bootstrapped? Like did you just put your own money in? Did you have investors that you had to go to say, hey, we're shutting down, Momentum and we're going to grow Pit Crew? I mean, what was that at that point, or was it just you and your team?
Yeah, I was self-financed, but we didn't really put a lot into it. And initially, that was me, and it wasn't that hard because of some past relationships. I was able to go and sell some equipment and do some service, which again had some decent margin. So it was pretty easy to bootstrap. And then I met a partner through one of the national coffee roasters that I was working with, who was servicing machines in New Orleans, and he was the guy in New Orleans. And we hit it off extremely well, and we ended up forming the company Pit Crew, and kind of grew it from there. So we had an existing customer base, I guess, is probably the short answer.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. All right, I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit because I want to talk about becoming a Q grader. So you've been a Q grader, I think, for almost a decade. Is that right?
Yeah, I was. My certificate just expired, but I was for about 10 years. Yeah.
But that experience doesn't expire. I mean, it only continues to grow, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, people have asked, like, what has kind of helped, either what helped shape you, or what do you think was the most useful, I guess, investment of time or resources? And for me, the Q grading experience was fantastic. If nothing else, it's really a codified, set of like knowledge and then and practical testing of that knowledge in a very short period of time. But it really gave you a new set of skills. I think people want a credential. People like to have something they can hang on the wall. For me, it was really the experience, and literally some of the technical skills that you learn in that are really be hard to find that experience in 1 week, which you can do taking a Q grader class. It's people get all uh, worried about it sometimes. There's people have test anxiety, and there is a lot of testing. But if you really look at it as just an X set of exercises and developing, your sensory skill, I think that's the best way to look at it. And it's a great experience.
So wait, so the Q grader process or education, so it's like only a week long?
Yeah, it's a week long. Most of the people that take it have been in the industry for quite a while because, there's a general knowledge piece, and then there's some technical aspects of tasting and grading and sensory development that you probably wouldn't do unless you had a background in coffee.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because the whole 10,000 hour rule, right? You become an expert when you've had 10,000 hours of doing the same thing.
Right.
And so I totally get that because from a sensory standpoint and being new to coffee, fairly new to coffee myself, that I think is the hardest part is sort of learning that distinction. Those very, the first time I'm like, that's a cup of coffee and that's a cup of coffee. It tastes the same, right? And
Yeah.
it is incredibly different once you really spend the hours perfecting it, I guess I should say.
Yeah. I think that's what the Q helps you do, helps you get some skills to be able to codify that. I just had this conversation with somebody who said that she doesn't really do a lot of tasting or we're talking about the culinary world, but the process applies and that you use for tasting and judging coffee can be the same in anything, right? You start with two things and it can be 2 cups of coffee. Do I like this one better or not better? And then it's why. And it's just continually refining those nuances. And I really think that's what anybody who does this for a living or if you do it in wine or cheese, right? How many, you could say, well, what's the difference between 2 Parmesans? Well, taste them, tell me what you think. And, that's why wine people have a pretty well-developed vocabulary. On one hand, they need to, right? You're not, and it's the same in coffee. We're not being, I'm not sure what the word is, but
pretentious or coffee snobs.
That's it. We're not trying to be snobs. It's just at some point when we talk to each other, we want to be able to differentiate between 2 coffees.
Yeah. Yeah. You need some sort of language, some sort of communication tool.
Right.
So when you made the decision to become a Q grader, I'm trying to figure out like, who is that ideal person or what position are they in that they should be pursuing that level of qualification? You sort of answered that, but I'm also looking for, is it someone who is a barista or is it a coffee owner or a green buyer? How would you sort of classify the ideal person to pursue that level of qualification? Because there's only you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's only like 7,000, I think, in the world and like 400 or 500 in the US. That's not a lot of people that have that level of qualification.
Yeah. I think it's really good for anybody that really thinks that they want to be in coffee, like as their life's pursuit. If you think, hey, this is a fun job, I'm going to be a barista at a large chain for a couple of years or a little place in college, then I'm going to leave, probably not worth the investment. But I think you could be in any part of it. I think as a roaster, it's indispensable. Certainly if you were on the QC side of a cafe, that would also be really important. And they do have some other programs now for the green side that are specifically really for farmers. But there was a guy who took one of the classes that was a toothpaste taster for one of the large consumer products company who aced it the first time.
Wow.
But,
that is interesting. They're not making coffee toothpaste, are they?
No, what's funny is he was just a sensory guy and it's those same skills kind of, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I love that.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I'm going to shift this over to you because I've heard that investing and growing the next generation of coffee professionals is something that you're not only interested in, but that it's actually part of your business plan too. So explain that a little bit for me.
Yeah, when my partner in New Orleans and I started the company, we were talking about, how do we grow the business? Where do we get techs from? So the initial thought was we wanted to go to vocational schools and give, people that are going down that path. There's in the service industry, we found that people that are mechanically inclined tend to do well, particularly strangely, people who've done aviation or auto mechanics seem to do really well. And then one of the things that kind of morphed into it is we started getting a lot of people that are starting up shops and they were underfinanced or for whatever reason needed a little bit of help. So one of the things we've done is we continue with startup people that are bootstrapping themselves is we're providing, free labor or equipment at cost to, get them set up and, we'll go in and plumb in their shop, put in water systems, help them with the technical ends that they have no idea about. And we just do that kind of as a, service to the industry, I guess. Yeah.
I love that. So have you defined within your business plan then? Like, how are you making that a reality? Are you defining like number of hours or, number of cafe owners or roaster? Like, how are you actually defining that for yourself?
Yeah.
I love that you're doing this.
It's one of these things that I think is pretty intuitive and easy for us to do. I don't think it's explicitly defined, but what we found is we tend to do work with people, usually for the first year or two as they get started up when we just know it's something they need and something they can't afford.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's sort of as you run into them, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so if there's anything is there anything that you look back on now and wish you would have known when you first started in coffee?
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of a great question. I think the thing that would be the most useful for people is to really develop the ability to critically taste things. And this, coffee, espresso, and to really, I think you can't overemphasize how friendly the coffee industry is. So it sounds kind of simple, right? You're in the coffee business. You should be able to understand what good coffee is. But I think it's really incumbent on people to really develop a critical skill for tasting. And that might involve going to people that you think are competitors, but they're not. The coffee world's like 98% friendly. People will tend to show you anything you want to know. But I think you really want to develop those skills, deep-rooted tasting skills for yourself, not just think, hey, because we made it here, or, Christy's a wonderful person, her coffee's the best. Well, you don't really know what the best is. You need to go try 100 different coffees. And here's the big surprise. There is no best. There is no one way to do any of it.
Right. It's very subjective, right? I mean, good coffee is subjective to a degree. To a degree, there's guidelines, and then I feel like it's subjective between people. But you mentioned the coffee industry just being friendly, and I 100%, 1000% agree with that. As I entered the coffee industry, having no background in it initially, everybody was willing to take my phone call. Everybody was willing to spend time sharing what they knew. It has been such an amazing experience for me, coming from financial services where everybody's siloed. And I love everything that I did for the last 30 years. But it is really incredibly refreshing and has just been so fun.
Great.
Yeah. So just wanted to back you up on that statement. I totally agree. I haven't run into that 2% yet, Alan. That is not nice, but I'm sure at some point I will. So who has had the most impact on you personally and professionally, or someone that's inspired you in coffee or in life?
I think on the coffee side, there was a woman, Linda Smithers, who, when I first met her, was a roaster in Ohio. She had owned 7 stores. She was a past president of the SCA. And I had been to a talk at a coffee show where I knew nobody. Saw a guy from Brazil talking. I wrote him, and Linda answers the email and says that she's the rep in the U.S. So she invites me to come down to Ohio from Ann Arbor. I had never met her. right? We talk for an hour and a half. She's coming back from some trip. I meet her and her husband. They show me the roasting plant. They taught me all sorts of things. And she just that spirit, I think I kind of subconsciously kind of picked up on that spirit of openness, which really kind of ran through a number of people. There's also a gentleman in Michigan outside of Ann Arbor named Tom Isaiah, who's a pioneer. He's been roasting coffee since the 70s. He went as a hippie touring Europe on a motorcycle, came back, opened up a little cafe called the Blind Pig, and he had espresso and Guinness on tap. And from day one, he would just show you literally everything. And the people that I think have been the most inspirational are the ones who don't try to tell you something. They have that kind of Socratic method of looking at things where, they say, hey, Christy, what do you think about this coffee? Or we do it like this. What do you think? And I think that's something I've tried to develop. Yeah.
That mindset or just the approach with people, right? It's about embracing versus embracing everybody's ideas, right? Versus just acting as the expert. But so is Todd still around? I got to get that story. Riding the motorcycle.
Yeah. This is Tom Isaiah. His company is called Coffee Express. He was really still is an amazing roaster. Just opened up a craft gelato place in downtown Detroit. Fascinating individual and just a wonderful person.
Yeah, sounds like it. So, okay, so I got to ask you about your, if you have a life motto or maybe a coffee motto.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I think my coffee motto is there are no absolutes in coffee. There's no one best coffee. There's no one best prep method. There's no one best coffee machine. It's really not about the equipment. Even things you learn, you should always question, and you should always taste yourself, and you should always, try different things. And that was driven home at a Roasters Guild event. The first time we went to the UC Davis school that they did just for coffee, we had a gentleman there named Rusty Angel who was with Bun. And everything you think you knew about coffee and his tasting was just blown away. And it was that same thing. He said, okay, we're going to do the following things. We're going to make the coffee coarser. What do you think is going to happen? We're going to filter it this way. What do you think is going to happen? And this is a room full of people that have probably, been in the industry a minimum of 5 years, probably up to 40. Everybody was blown away. So even if you think you know something, there are no absolutes. If you made a coffee one way in a Chemex, yesterday and it was great, it doesn't mean the next coffee you buy from the next roaster is going to be the same. So, don't think about numbers. There's no absolutes. Just always, always be improving, always be inquisitive.
I absolutely love that no absolutes in coffee. I learned that the hard way, Alan. As I went and did all my research, I'm like, oh, okay, this is how you should grind. This is for this kind of brewing method. And this is, it was really difficult. It's like, wait, I need to understand the why behind each one of these. To your point, understanding the why behind it will help you come to the table and actually have your own opinion and have your, but it doesn't mean one is right or wrong. So I love that. I think that's my favorite one so far. Okay. So is there a coffee publication you reference that helps you keep up on trends or hot topics in the industry?
Yeah, there are two that I look at. I mean, online, Sprudge has become, the de facto. Sprudge is fantastic. I still really enjoy Roast Magazine quite a bit. I think those two for me are the go-to.
I gotta check out Sprudge. I don't think I've seen that yet. Roast Magazine, I'm all over that. I love it. It's a beautiful publication. But I'll have to check that one out.
Good.
So, okay. So can you share like a random fascinating fact that most coffee consumers probably don't know?
There's some small trivial pieces, but I think good one good number to remember in coffee is if you start with a 16-to-1 ratio of coffee and water, I think that's a great way to get you on the target, right? To get you on the page for where can I then start to adjust. So really, if you were going to do nothing else, think 16 whatever of water, 1 whatever of coffee, an ounce, a gram, a liter, any of those. I do that when I was visiting my brother in Michigan. He didn't have a coffee maker. We got out a blender. I had a scale and I could do a 16-to-1 to get you on the page.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's perfect advice because a lot of people don't know that ratio. I mean, everybody in the coffee industry, right? Like that's a good go-to, good starting point. But I'll tell you, prior to me entering, I didn't know that ratio. Okay. So I am now going to shift to the U3 top 3, which are very brief answers. Your favorite brewing method?
Chemex. I like the thick filter of a Chemex.
Beautiful. For consumption, like the coffee of choice, like black or a latte or cold or hot or a certain origin or wash.
Simple. I like a well-pulled espresso. That's my go-to drink.
Perfect. And how many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
On a normal day, I would say probably no less than 2, probably no more than 5. And then if I'm doing some sort of professional development, sky's the limit.
Right. All right. So, as you had sort of alluded to before, the coffee industry goes wide and deep, right? Is there a particular area of coffee that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, espresso is one. And if there's one part of the industry that I love and can do every single day, it's cupping coffees, like having a cupping table with, 5 to 25 coffees and cupping multiple samples. That never gets old. And I think it's really just the best part of the business.
And I also saw that you enjoy a Robusto as well.
Yeah. So this goes back to that point about there's no absolutes in coffee. There are some spectacular Robusta coffees. There are specialty Robustas that are, staggering coffees. There's also really bad Arabica coffees. And when I roast coffee, I do like a little bit of fine Robusta.
Got it. That's totally interesting. And just for anybody who doesn't come from the industry, just define really quickly difference between Arabica and Robusta.
Yeah, those are Arabicas and Robustas are the 2 most widely cultivated species. Robusta, like the name implies, is a little hardier, so it's got a higher yield, so it's cheaper to produce, cheaper to buy.
Yep, perfect. All right. So, Alan, you have shared your fabulous journey with us and an amazing, immense amount of knowledge that you have. And I wish that your next city you were going to open it up in is Chicago, because I'm going to need you here. But who knows? We can always fly you out. All right. I want to give you an opportunity to share where someone can learn more about you or Pit Crew Coffee Service.
The easiest way to learn more or see us is on our website, pitcrew.coffee. We're in the .coffee domain, or follow us on Instagram.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alan, and of course for helping us unite the world through coffee.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thanks to you, our followers, for joining us at U3 Coffee. We'll see you next time.